The Lend-Lease Act was a policy under which the United States supplied the Soviet Union and other Allied nations with food, oil, and material between 1941 and 1945. The aid was given free of charge on the basis that such help was essential for the defense of the United States. President Roosevelt believed that if the Soviets were defeated, the Allies would be far more likely to lose. An equivalent to $773 billion in 2022 when accounting for inflation worth of supplies was shipped. 17% of the total war expenditures of the United States. In total, 93% of the wartime production of railroad equipment by the Soviet Union was supplied by Lend-Lease, including 1911 locomotives and 11,225 railcars. Much of the logistical assistance of the Soviet military was provided by hundreds of thousands of US-made trucks, and by 1945, nearly a third of the truck strength of the Red Army was US-built. Lend-Lease also supplied significant amounts of weapons and ammunition. The Soviet Air Force received 18,200 aircraft, which amounted to about 30% of Soviet wartime fighter and bomber production. Most tank units were Soviet-built models, but about 7,000 Lend-Lease tanks were used by the Red Army, 8% of wartime production. Without these Western shipments under Lend-Lease, the Soviet Union not only would not have been able to win the Great Patriotic War, it would not have been able even to oppose the German invaders, since it could not itself produce sufficient quantities of arms and military equipment or adequate supplies of fuel and ammunition. Nikita Khrushchev, having served as a military commissar and intermediary between Stalin and his generals during the war, addressed directly the significance of Lend-Lease aid in his memoirs. I would like to express my candid opinion about Stalin's views on whether the Red Army and the Soviet Union could have coped with Nazi Germany and survived the war without aid from the United States and Britain. No one ever discussed this subject officially, and I don't think Stalin left any written evidence of his opinion, but I will state here that several times in conversations with me he noted that these were the actual circumstances. Delivery was via the Arctic convoys, the Persian Corridor, and the Pacific route. The Arctic route was the shortest and most direct route for Lend-Lease aid to the USSR, though it was also the most dangerous as it involved sailing past German-occupied Norway. 4 million tons of goods were shipped by the Arctic route. This constituted some 25% of the total aid to the USSR during the war. The Persian Corridor was the longest route, and was not fully operational until mid-1942. Thereafter it saw the passage of roughly 25% of the total goods. The Pacific route opened in August 1941, but was affected by the start of hostilities between Japan and the US. After December 1941, only Soviet ships could be used, and, as Japan and the USSR observed a strict neutrality towards each other, only non-military goods could be transported. Nevertheless, some 8 million tons of goods went by this route, 50% of the total. Basically, all Lend-Lease shipments entered the Soviet Union via 3 harbors: Murmansk in the north, Astrakhan in the south, and Vladivostok in the east. The German military high command was well aware of the immense effect of the Western goods on the Eastern Front, yet there was no comprehensive German strategy against Lend-Lease. Only the Air Fleet 5, which stationed in Norway, was tasked among others to interdict Allied convoys to Murmansk and strike the Soviet Arctic ports. But in the years of both 1942 and 1943, the German army had the assets and the equipment to cut or at least periodically sever the Allied Lend-Lease routes. The most important Soviet harbor was Vladivostok in the Soviet Far East. After unloading the ships, the equipment was transported to Moscow by the Trans-Siberian Railway. The Trans-Siberian Railway is a large railway system that connects European Russia to the Russian Far East. Spanning a length of over 9,000 kilometers, it is the longest railway line in the world. It runs from the city of Moscow in the west to the city of Vladivostok in the east. Even after Japan went to war with the US in December of 1941, Japan usually allowed Soviet ships to sail between the US and Vladivostok unmolested. As a result, the Pacific route became the safest connection between the US and the USSR. But the German Navy could have mined the port of Vladivostok. The Type 10 U-boats were long-range mine layers, designed to mine US and Canadian ports. A total of 8 Type 10 boats were produced, and the first was launched in May 1941. Vladivostok could have been the #1 priority of this line-layer submarine fleet. Then the German Air Force could have attacked the Trans-Siberian Railway line itself. The Luftwaffe's intelligence branch, under Major Joseph Beppo Schmid, had identified the problem of severing the Soviet supply and communication artery to the destruction of some important railway bridges. This is a map of Soviet railways in 1943. The European part of Soviet railways starts at Omsk. From Omsk already 2 lines branch out, to Chelyabinsk and to Sverdlovsk, today Ekaterinburg. So, to bomb the TSR, the bombs need to be dropped after Omsk. Omsk is 2,240 kilometers away from Moscow in a direct line. Considering that a bomber for such a raid would need to start from a well-prepared permanent airfield and then would need to avoid the AA heavy regions, the effective trip would be at the very least 2,700 to 3,000 kilometers. The only available bomber which would have been capable to carry out this strike was the Heinkel He-111 with auxiliary fuel tanks and a limited bomb load. The other issue is the size of the target. Railway bridges are very small targets. No one seriously attempted to destroy major bridges at night. Even in clear weather with a good moon, the difficulties of locating and then bombing the bridge are immense. If the bridge is a long way behind enemy lines, the mission requires daylight, good weather, accurate navigation, and precision bombing. The precision part would not have been impossible. From the summer of 1942, the Luftwaffe started to use the Lot 7 bomb site in most of its level bombers. It was similar to the United States Norden bomb site, but much simpler to operate and maintain. It consisted of a single metal box containing the vast majority of the mechanism, with a tube extending out the bottom with a mirror that reflected the image of the target into a small telescope in the box. The bombardier would first locate the target in the bomb site and continue to adjust the dials until it remained motionless in the eyepiece. This allowed the bomb site to calculate the wind speed from the cancelled-out drift rate, which in turn allowed to make an accurate calculation of ground speed. On final approach, the autopilot was engaged, while the bomb site adjusted the flight path in response to last-minute changes by the bombardier. Bomb release was normally automatic in order to reduce timing errors. In July 1942, Luftwaffe's Bomber Wing 55 took out the vital Rostov Bridge with several direct hits from a height of 5,000 meters with the help of the Lot 7 bomb site. This single strike effectively severed the Soviet main line of communication in the Caucasus sector. A similar strike would have been possible against the TSR bridges. The entry point of the Persian corridor was the harbor of Astrakhan. This city was within the range of the German bombers. The Luftwaffe could have performed an Astrakhan blitz day and night in 1942 and 1943. From the port, the goods were transported to Moscow by rail and on the Volga River. The Luftwaffe could have mined the Volga with its parachute mines. A parachute mine is basically a naval mine dropped from an aircraft by parachute. These mines were first used against Britain in 1940. A large number of mines could sever the river traffic and the flow of goods on the Persian corridor. To disrupt the railway traffic, the Luftwaffe could have used its trainbuster squadrons. These were equipped with Junkers Ju-88C-6 heavy fighters from the summer of 1942. The C-series had a solid metal nose, typically housing one 20mm cannon and 3 MG-17 machine guns. The aircraft retained the ventral gondola under the crew compartment, though individual units sometimes removed this to reduce weight and drag to enhance performance. These aircraft usually patrolled in pairs behind the enemy lines and attacked locomotives. The most effective pilot was Udo Cordes. Affectionately known as the Locomotive Killer, he flew 296 sorties and destroyed 81 locomotives in total. And last but not least, the previously mentioned Luftflotte 5 or Air Fleet 5 was responsible for all Luftwaffe activity in occupied Norway throughout the Second World War. It is famous for its action against the large convoy PQ-17 in the summer of 1942. The merchant ships were attacked by Luftwaffe aircraft and U-boats, and of the 35 ships, only 11 reached their destination, delivering 70,000 short tons of cargo. After the goods were unloaded, they were transported by the Kirov Railway. This was the only Soviet railway line between Murmansk city in the north and Leningrad in the south. The total distance between the two cities is almost 1,500 kilometers. The railway could have been attacked by the previously mentioned train buster squadrons, but also by special forces units. The German army possessed some of the best mountain infantry units in the world. The length of the line provided numerous opportunities for coordinated sabotage missions. A coordinated strategic operations against all three routes in the same time would have dramatically decreased the amount of Allied support to the Soviet Union. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss my future work, please make sure you are subscribed to my channel and press the bell notification button. Thank you, and see you in the next video.